recording this, and we are starting. Okay, wonderful. So we are discussing today this whole aspect of toxicity. So the title of this webinar being Keeping Clean in a Toxic World, and this is really one of my favorite topics. I think your eyes will be opened, and you'll have lots of good information here to just kind of pick up and go and start to be looking for things in your environment that may be toxic. So, and the intent is really not to create lots of fear around our environment, but to be educated and to know what steps you can follow to minimize your risk. So another point to keep in mind that these webinars are educational in nature. We're not trying to replace the diagnosis of your physician or to diagnose or treat an illness. So if there's something here that seems intriguing, please bring it back to your healthcare practitioner and have a discussion with them about it to see what would be the best approach for you. So what we're going to do in this webinar this evening is a couple of different things. You're going to learn how the process of detoxification is important in cancer prevention. And that word detoxification, sometimes we just call it detox. And it has lots of different connotations in the medical world. Typically, it's been traditionally referred to in the context of drug and alcohol detox. But really what we're referring to tonight is much more in line with what we might say is metabolic detoxification, so the processes that are always happening within your body in order to get rid of toxins. There are at least 5 main body organs that help to detoxify the body from the toxins that it contains and starts to accumulate. So we're going to talk about what those 5 main body organs are. And even more importantly, we're going to talk about what you can do to keep all 5 of those on track with being healthy and doing their job properly. So if you recall, in the first webinar, I brought up this book called 5 to Thrive by Dr. Lise Altschuler and Carolyn Gazella. It's a wonderful book. Harmony Hill carries it. And essentially, Dr. Altschuler is a breast cancer survivor herself. And she did lots of research on cancer, ways to prevent it, ways to treat it. And she talks about the 5 key pathways that are involved. And so what I mentioned in the first webinar is that we're always going to be coming back to these pathways, no matter what we're talking about. So in this webinar specifically, we will focus on hormones and also the process of digestion, which is often coupled to that of metabolic detoxification. So you're going to see that we'll be touching on both of those. So I think it's pretty obvious that we are in an increasingly toxic world. We're surrounded with lots of different environmental pollutants, contaminants, and again, we don't want to cultivate a feeling of fear, but we want to wrap our head around what can we do in order to minimize or reduce the amount of toxicity that we're exposed to. In fact, I just happened to be traveling some days ago. I was in the Newark airport, and I always like to see, you know, what's trending. I look at the magazines, and here, as you can see, there's always something hot in the news around food, always, it seems like. So here we have on this magazine cover a discussion about toxic foods, talking about sugar kills. So indeed, we have kind of this environment around food that is becoming increasingly questionable as to what is really in our food supply. Now, even before we take a bite of food, we're starting to see that there is a chemical load that begins in utero. In fact, there was a wonderful study that was published on the Environmental Working Group's website talking about how up to 232 different toxic chemicals have been identified in the umbilical cord blood of 10 babies. Now, that's pretty amazing if you think about it, to think that even before we're born, we're being subject to some degree of toxic burden. So in this case, 230 different toxic compounds. So what are the sources of toxicity? Because if we can understand the sources, then we can start to understand what we can do to prevent or to minimize that risk. So basically, just about everything in our environment might have some degree of toxins. So if you look at this list, the things that we ingest, things like drinking water, things like foods, these are the obvious ones. The others are things that are already in our environment. So things like household cleaners. So if you think about what you wash your floors at home with, and how if you have pets at home and how they might track with that substance on the floor that they picked up, and then you touch your pet, and eventually what you see is you start to see a circulation of toxins without you even realizing it. Maybe in your front yard you use pesticides, herbicides, or insecticides to keep your lawn or your garden very fresh and free of a lot of different pests. And a lot of those things can track inside the home as well. Auto exhaust, we're hearing lots about plastics. Gosh, even the Journal of the American Medical Association is now talking about bisphenol A in plastics and how this is correlated with things like mortality and even cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Organochlorines, so these are things like polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, things that leach out into our water supply, into our food supply. We're starting to see more and more research about these organochlorines and how detrimental they can be. Carpet and paint, of course, emitting their fumes. If you just got a brand new car, chances are it's probably emitting different fumes that can be relatively toxic. Workplace chemicals, personal care products. We're going to have a whole webinar at some point next year just focusing on what you take in through your skin. The skin is one of the largest bodily organs, and so you might want to know what you're putting on in terms of lotions and potions and shampoos and creams and toothpaste and deodorant. All of that is really relevant, thinking of the phthalates and the parabens that you might be getting in your products. Then there's the obvious things like cigarette and cigar smoke, air pollution, and even the things that we encounter on an everyday basis that can be on our food, in our water, and in our environment, things like bacteria, viruses, and fungi. So these persistent organic pollutants, they're being called that in the literature, these organochlorine compounds. What we're starting to see, and you can see that the reference here is very recent. There's a lot of new work emerging on POPs, or persistent organic pollutants. And what we're seeing is that they're associated with increased markers of inflammation. Now remember that inflammation is one of the hallmarks, one of the pathways that Dr. Altshuler talks about when it comes to things like cancer, when it comes to things like aging. And in fact, we had Sarah ask the question last time, how do we know that we are inflamed? So again, looking for the signs of redness, pain, and swelling, and the development of masses would all be considered in the realm of inflammation. Also being overweight or obese, and also having an increased toxin load. So if you live in an urban environment, you are exposed to a lot of these toxins, chances are they can also be propagating a lot of inflammation in your body. In fact, a lot of these pollutants in our environment like to store in the fat tissue. So as you start to lose weight, let's imagine that you do go on a weight loss program or some type of regimen to start losing weight. What might tend to happen is you might start to liberate a lot of these different pollutants into your bloodstream. So working very carefully and cautiously with your practitioner to be sure that you're losing weight in a safe way is highly recommended. Now, here's the connection to hormones. And again, hormones are one of the pathways that Dr. Altshuler talks about as being really important when it comes to cancer. A lot of these different pollutants in our environment act as what we call endocrine disruptors. Now, that's a big term, but essentially what it means is that a lot of these different plastics and compounds in plastics, like bisphenol A, which is why I'm showing the water bottle here, can get into our system and start to change up how we metabolize things like estrogen. So in many different forms of cancer, what you're looking at is not just the total amount of cancer or total amount of estrogen, but how the body's metabolizing estrogen and getting it out of the body. And so many times these plastics, these plasticizers get in and they start changing how we metabolize different hormones, and that can be detrimental. Now, keep in mind that children tend to be a little bit more sensitive to the effects of a lot of these toxins because they have smaller bodies, so they don't have a larger mass to dilute a lot of these toxins into. So there are going to be certain segments of the population that are going to be more susceptible to the effects of these toxins. Heavy metals is another big one. I'm sure you've heard of all the different types of conditions and research that's going on around heavy metals and why it's a concern. So looking at some of the top ones, and this is a very short list of heavy metals to be concerned about, but things like lead. So back in the early 1900s when lead paint was being used to paint homes, the inside of homes, what we saw there was that there was a connection between the amount of lead in the bloodstream and also childhood behavior at school. Also, different amounts of lead and even small increases in the amount of lead can also be implicated in increased blood pressure. So there's a lot there with lead. Unfortunately, we're seeing lots of different substances being lead-free, or, you know, that this is kind of being removed from the system, but it's not to say that we've actually gotten rid of it completely. Mercury is a big one, and we're going to talk about some food sources of mercury for sure. Cadmium, which you find in batteries, and a lot of this stuff, maybe we don't eat it directly, but again, it makes its way into our environment, leaches into the groundwater, and finds its way into the things that we are taking in. You probably heard a lot about arsenic. It was in the news a lot lately as it relates to rice. And again, just the rice being grown in fields with water containing arsenic, and then the plant takes up that heavy metal and it incorporates that into the grain or the plant. And then aluminum. So when I think of aluminum, I typically think of things like deodorant, which typically you do find aluminum in deodorant because it acts as a binder of odor. So what is the association between all these toxins? Is this just something that small groups of people are talking about, or is it really a valid concern for us? So this was a chart that's taken from the Institute of Functional Medicine, kind of their toolkit, looking at the different conditions and all the potential correlations here with toxins. So you can see that everything from ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, to allergies, to Alzheimer's, to anemia, autism, autoimmune diseases, things like rheumatoid arthritis, things like multiple sclerosis, things like blood pressure. And of course, the one that we're most concerned with within this webinar series is cancer. And so look at the plethora of different toxins that are somehow associated with cancer incidence and occurrence. So a long list here of aluminum to vinyl chloride, the phthalates, nickel, lead, heterocyclic amines, bisphenol A, etc. And here's kind of a continuation of that list. If you look in the first column there, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, long list there. It's kind of a nebulous syndrome that seems to be more and more emerging. Is that because we've got so many toxins in the environment? Diabetes, fertility issues. Why are so many women and men these days increasingly infertile? Does it have something to do with toxins? Well, it's definitely a possibility. And of course, the nervous system is very sensitive to toxins. So things like neuropathies or nerve pains or Parkinson's disease, neurodevelopment issues, neurobehavioral issues, tremors, things of that nature might be associated with the degree of toxins in the environment. So how do you know if you have a lot of toxins in your body? Well, there are lots of different symptoms that you might be noticing, and again, I think it's really a good idea to work with a good practitioner who is very much in the know on detoxification and what you can do. But things that would fall into this category, things like muscle aches, things that would involve your mind, like you're having difficulty focusing or concentrating, you feel tired all the time. Maybe you've started to develop a lot of food allergies, or you're highly sensitive to chemicals in your environment. These are the people that, you know, they walk into a room and straight away they become sick because they smell a fume, an odor, something that most people may not respond to, but they've become so sensitized. I kind of liken it to the fact of, think of our bodies as a glass, just a cup to hold water. And as we start to be more and more exposed to different toxins, it's almost like our body fills up, similar to water filling a glass, and then eventually we start to overflow, right? This is when we start to get symptoms. And this is when we get the flooding, we start to get diseases. So a lot of these things that kind of fall into the bucket of fatigue and achiness and weakness might be connected to toxic body burden. So what can you do? This is really why we're here tonight, is to give you lots of different tools. So how can you get clean? What can you do? So there are 5 main organs, and this is one of our objectives, is really to focus on what are those organs and how do you really optimize them. So we're going to go through each of these sequentially, things like the gut, the liver, the kidney, the lung, and the skin. And there are some other organs, things like the lymphatics or focusing on the blood are also really important. But we're going to, for the sake of this conversation tonight, we're just going to focus on these 5. So let's work on the gut. In the gut, the way I see this, and I like to present it as also the symbolic aspects of these different organs of the body. In Chinese medicine, they refer to the gut, actually the spleen, as the peacemaker. So we definitely want to make peace with our gut, because if we don't make peace with our gut, we're going to have all kinds of issues. And I believe I mentioned in the first webinar talking about how the gut is really at the crux of so many different issues. So there is a very nice 5R gut healing program that you could follow with a practitioner that is skilled in this. But essentially what we're going to focus on is one aspect of that 5R program, which is the first step in that process, which is removing. If your gut isn't removing and clearing and excreting a lot of these substances, then that becomes a big problem. Then working on a lot of the other organs, almost that really becomes secondary to getting the gut primarily in order to excrete a lot of these different things. So one of the first things that you can do to remove is to drink water, and good clean water, good pure water, so that you're not taking in lots of contaminants. So, you know, the question always comes up about, well, what kind of water filter? Well, there's a whole range of different types of water filters, of course, and probably at the lower tier would be something like a handheld pitcher that you would run water through and then pour that into your glass. Some of the more sophisticated filtered water approaches would be things that involve under-the-counter or even countertop filters that can be really good at removing not just things like heavy metals, but a lot of other contaminants as well. So water is really key, and I think it's one of those things that it might seem like common sense, but we may find ourselves not doing it. So I think that carrying around water with us throughout the day is really key, and also making sure that we are drinking it out of containers that aren't plastic in nature. So things that are glass or stainless steel are preferred. The other way to help keep the gut clean is to get more fiber, and that's to help to ensure healthy bowel movements, right? You want to keep the flow going in the gut. You don't want to have constipation. Constipation usually connects to greater toxins in the body because you're not getting rid of them. So they're staying in the body and they're being recirculated. So 1 to 2 healthy bowel movements per day is really preferred, and that can be achieved through a number of different plant foods, things like fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and flaxseed meal. In fact, I'm going to show you a table of the best, in my mind, some of the best fiber sources. What you also want to do is avoid allergens in foods that you are sensitive to. So this would be the immune system that Dr. Altshuler talks about. The immune system, if we're constantly taking in things that we're sensitive to, then our immune system is going to be upregulated, and then we start the inflammation cascade. So if you work with a practitioner to figure out what foods are you sensitive to, doing the elimination diet, eventually you can figure out what foods you are responding to. Okay, then the last thing on this slide before I open up the phone lines is I want to bring in, for every organ that we talk about, I want to talk about an emotional component. Because when we start to detoxify, when we start to let go of things, we might also notice that certain emotions start coming up. And the gut is really good about letting go. It symbolizes what we have attachment to and what we need to let go of. So I would just ask you that more of a symbolic question: what do you need to let go of? Are there things that are unhealthy in your environment, things that need transformation, things that need to be changed or modified in some way? All right, so great. What I'm going to do at this point, if you have any questions, I'm going to take a pause here. And the way that you let me know if you have questions is there's a little button on your screen where you can raise your hand. So if I see that you put your hand up, I'm going to unmute you, and then you can just ask the question over the phone. And if you don't have a question, that's okay too. But I definitely want to open up this space for you. Okay. So no questions so far. So far, again, we covered talking about toxins, toxicity, how they're pervasive in our environment, and also how they connect to different diseases. So now we're working through each of the different 5 organs. Okay, so if you have a question while we're going through this, feel free to just raise your hand at any point. We don't have to wait for that 10-minute mark again. So let's continue going through this. All right, so I mentioned that there are some good sources of fiber. In fact, if you look on the label of different food products, you're going to see different terminology used. You might see a good source of fiber. That typically means 3 grams or less of fiber. And you might see verbiage that would refer to being an excellent source of fiber. Excellent source of fiber, according to food labeling law, means 5 grams or more per serving. So what I'm focusing on here are both good and excellent sources of fiber. The average American, now I know some of you are international, so this might be different in different countries, but I would say on the whole, people fall very short in fiber. We typically get about 11 to 15 grams of fiber in one day, and what we need is more on the order of 30 to 35 grams. And that kind of depends on how many calories we're taking in. So if you see here, these are some of the ones that I prefer. If we look at the bean category, on the whole, getting half a cup of cooked beans will give you about 5 to 8 grams of fiber, depending on the type of bean. So the smaller the bean, typically the greater the fiber, and that's just because you have greater surface area. So with lentils, lentils are one of the smaller beans. 1 cup of cooked lentils gives you almost 16 grams of fiber, which is, again, more than many people get in one whole day of eating. So if you can make it a regular practice to get things like a bean soup on a daily basis, or even things like hummus, which is essentially just ground chickpeas or garbanzo beans, you would be getting much more in the way of fiber. Black beans are also great at 15 grams of fiber. 1 medium apple is about 4 grams of fiber. And many people don't eat fruit with the skin on, but The skin is where the fiber is, most of that fiber. You know, you have two different forms of fiber, insoluble and soluble fiber, and a lot of that insoluble fiber is found in the skin, and that's really important because it acts almost like a broom in our gut. It kind of sweeps things through, takes the toxins with them, and allows them to be excreted from the body. The important point to note here is to make sure that you're washing the skin, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, I also, if you think about the kiwi fruit, I'm kind of an oddball in that regard, perhaps, because I even like to eat the skin on the kiwi fruit. I wash it really well, but I'm always trying to get additional skin from fruits and vegetables if I can. So instead of peeling carrots, keeping that skin on the carrot, just making sure that it's washed really well. So you can see some other things here. Berries are another very wonderful source of fiber. In 1 cup of raw berries, let's just take raspberries. Raspberries have 2 times the amount of fiber that blueberries do. And the reason why, if you think about it, look at the structure of a raspberry. It's got all those individual little kind of the segments of the raspberry that are covered in skin. So the actual skin-to-fruit ratio is greater, whereas with a blueberry, you have you definitely do have the skin, but you don't have as great amount of surface area. So that's why blackberries are also great. Flaxseed is also wonderful, flaxseed meal, and flaxseed itself, even before you grind it, 2 tablespoons will give you close to 4 grams of fiber. So lots of good ways to stack up and get that 30 grams of fiber per day. And in some cultures, they even get up to 50 grams. So what I also want to do is throughout these webinars, I want to make these very educational to the point where you can just go and find this stuff yourself. I want you to know what are the go-to websites. So in terms of looking at the fiber content of foods, I would say that this is an excellent website. And I would say if you want, make sure you write this website down, and I have it at the bottom here. So www.ndb.nal.usda.gov. This is essentially kind of the gold standard website where you can go in and search for the nutritional content of different foods. And when you go to that website, you'll see this link right in the middle where it says Start Your Search Here. You click on that, you type in a food, and you'll get all kinds of good information. Another website that I like very much is the World's Healthiest Foods. And this is a not-for-profit foundation that offers a lot of good information on, you know, even things like high-fiber foods. They give you recipes. You can sign up for their alerts. But the website is whfoods.com. I think it's a wonderful site. It gives you a lot of information about individual foods that you might want to know. All right, so if we're taking in foods, we definitely want to be sure that we're making a lot of clean choices. So when it comes to animal products, these are the ones that you want to choose: free range, wild if it's salmon. It's always challenging, I think, for myself to be on the Atlantic coast of the United States because you don't typically get a lot of wild salmon, and that's important because you're not going to get the richness and the complexity of different things that the fish are eating if you get farmed salmon versus wild. Hormone and antibiotic free is another thing that you want to be looking at, especially if you buy dairy products. Choosing organically grown versus conventionally grown produce is also going to be important, and I have another slide to talk a little bit more about that. You want to wash and scrub all produce. We will talk more about the scrubbing aspect, but just because it's organic doesn't mean that it's kind of a free food and, you know, you can start eating it right away. It still needs to be washed, preferably, because 30% of organic food is still contaminated with low levels of insecticides, herbicides, and pesticides. So washing and scrubbing is going to be really important. Preparing food using good containers and pots and pans, and looking at your cooking utensils. So things like stainless steel, looking at glass, quality cast iron or porcelain are some better choices. And then finally, buying food in glass rather than plastic. And of course, glass is going to be heavier, but you can recycle it, and it can have other purposes as well. And then at least you won't have the potential contamination that you do with plastic. And with plastic, what you see is that typically you see the release of plasticizers in the presence of temperature change. So if you have a bottle of water that you have in your car, and it's summertime, chances are that when you put the air conditioning on in your car and then turn the car off and then it gets hot again and that bottled water stays in the car, you're getting the release of a lot of these plasticizers. Okay. And also, getting filtered water is key at home as well as at work. So I believe I mentioned this in our previous webinar talking about the Environmental Working Group's website. If you don't know about this website, this is a good one as well, ewg.org. They give lots of great information. So these are the dirty dozen. These are the fruits and vegetables that they would recommend buying organic because the contamination with pesticides and such are really problematic. So the worst ones are the top three, apples, celery, and strawberries. Fortunately, apples and celery are very easy to wash. Strawberries, not so much. But if you're using soapy water and scrubbing using your fingers as best you can, that should be pretty helpful. The Clean 15, now if you are working on a budget and you don't want to have to spend your money on foods that don't necessarily need to be organic, you might want to be looking at this list. So the foods that are best and lower in pesticides, and again, I think that this is much more about where you are in terms of the globe, because there might be different levels of contamination in different places. But at least in the United States, onions, corn, and pineapple tend to be lower in pesticides. And also with pineapple, you're not necessarily eating the skin, so that's a good thing. With onions, you are peeling that first layer of skin as well. All right. So, going backwards. All right. So, and again, go to that website if you want to get more information. There are some other tips on how to reduce exposure to pesticides. So, looking at the amount of animal fat that you're taking in, because as I mentioned before, a lot of those toxins store in fat, whether our own fat of our own bodies, but then also animal fat. So trying to trim fat as best you can when it comes to animal products, and trying not to overconsume foods that would concentrate pesticides because of the fat. We talked about buying organic, trying to buy local produce in season. And you know, this has benefits even beyond reducing exposure to pesticides. If we're, like one of my colleagues, Dr. Kornberg, will say, sometimes through the year we're eating like we're always in summer. So even when it's the fall and the winter, we're still eating oranges and citrus, even though they're not in season where we live. So this will send different messages to our cells, kind of keeping us always in storage and in kind of that sugar mode. So I think for other reasons, too, it's important to buy local and be eating foods in season. Peeling off the skin or removing the outer layers of leaves can also be helpful if it's questionable. You can use a lot of different solutions. So a lot of them are vegetable-based. Many of them use citrus type of extracts in order to bind to a lot of those fatty waxes and such that are on the fruits and vegetables. You may want to wash your hands even for 20 seconds with warm water and soap before and after. You know, we don't think about all the hand-to-mouth contact that we have. We touch food in the grocery store, putting it in bags, and then we get in the car, we're touching our steering wheel. You know, you can imagine now how there's constant repeat exposure. Cutting away any damaged or bruised areas before preparing or eating. Washing the produce before you peel it, and that's just, again, good common sense so that you don't get contamination on the peeler or on the knife. In fact, I like to wash fruits and vegetables when I first buy them. So I bring my groceries home, wash them in a sink with soapy water, scrubbing them, drying them off, and then putting them in the refrigerator or keeping them out. And the vegetable brush is key. So you can buy a brush for $2.99, and again, you want to dispose of that brush pretty much every 6 to 8 weeks or so, because it by itself, just like a sponge, is going to be collecting different things. And you want to dry the produce with a clean cloth or paper towel when you're done washing them to further reduce bacteria that might be present. And if you're not sure, in fact, I was just talking last night with a group that we were all just talking about lettuce. Lettuce is one of those not necessarily contaminated with pesticides and such, but very contaminated with bacteria. So things like E. coli is really rampant in things of more of a leafy green nature. So making sure that you, if you can tear away the outer leaves, washing it really well, drying it is going to be really important. And so buying the lettuce and the different leafy greens that have been triple washed, I think, is probably a good idea. And then even washing it again before you go to use it might be wise as well. So here's an example of one of the vegetable scrub brushes. They have some with handles that you can use. But the studies show that mechanical motion and actually using some type of instrument like this to mechanically remove the debris is very effective. What about fish? What about methyl mercury? There's a lot of concern about that, and the website to go to here is also ewg.org. Wonderful website. Here are the fish listed in red as to the ones that are high mercury containing. Of course, not many of us eat shark, but swordfish is on the menus in many restaurants, as is mackerel and also tuna steaks. Canned tuna is also on that list. And when it comes to canned tuna, the larger the species of tuna, the greater the mercury level. And that's just kind of common sense. The larger the fish, the more they're going to be concentrating a lot of mercury. So you can see that list here, but what can you take in that is lower in mercury? So let me just comment on the tuna. There is a distinction between the different types of tuna. So the albacore tuna tends to have 3 times the mercury level than something like chunk light. So chunk light it tends to be a smaller fish that's used and tends to be lower in mercury. But here are some other types of fish. I'm not as keen, of course, on things like fish sticks because they tend to be breaded and have other issues, but things like cod or whitefish, the non-oily fish tend to give you lower mercury because, again, the mercury is found in more of the fatty, oily, large fish. So it's a double-edged sword, actually, because when you're not getting a lot of the oilier fish, you're not getting a lot of the omega-3s that are beneficial. But as you can see on this list, you do have salmon. Salmon, wild Pacific, tends to be lower in mercury. So I'm just going to see if there are any questions out there before we continue. Okay, we'll keep going. Just wanted to check in. All right. So moving on from the gut, let's talk about the liver, and we're going to spend some time here because really the liver is the hub of detox in the body. In fact, the reason why I have these boots and camouflage clothing here is because in Chinese medicine, the liver is referred to as the general. So whereas the gut is more the peacemaker, we want to make peace with the gut, the liver is the general and gives orders to a lot of the different other organs around it. It's the hub of so many functions in the body that it really has this role of leadership in much of our physiological function. So when it comes to cleansing, there's a 3-step process that the liver goes through. And the first step in that process is when a toxin comes into the body, the liver sees it and it wants to make that toxin water soluble. Keep in mind that a lot of things that come in are fat soluble, which is why when we talk about the fatty fish or the fatty meat or even the toxin storing in our fat tissue, what the liver does in order to get rid of this is it makes it water soluble, and it does that through a chemical process. Now, once it's become water soluble, it actually becomes even more toxic and reactive in the body. So what the liver quickly wants to do is to couple that water soluble toxin with a compound to make it easy for the body to get rid of. And the body gets rid of it typically in the bile, which is released out into the intestine and then excreted through the stool, and also through the urine. So it's kind of like, the way I think of it is, imagine that your house is like your body. So when we first get all the garbage together in the house, maybe you have little waste paper baskets in your bathroom or in your offices or in your bedrooms or in the kitchen. So you get all of that garbage together. Maybe you put it in one room. That's the first process here with the liver. It's getting all those toxins together. The next phase is now taking the garbage outside of the house, because if we leave the garbage in the house, it's going to smell really bad, especially when it's all together. So you need to take it out of the house, and that's what it's doing in the second and the third processes here, and then waiting for the garbage person to pick it up and take it. So this is a very complicated diagram of what I just spoke about, which is why I try to put it in very simple terms first. But let me just call out some things here. Just follow me with the boxes. So the first part of liver cleansing involves the first phase, which involves a lot of different enzymes in your liver, and they all have to be working in such a way that is optimal. And this is why caffeine can be really good for some people. They don't get affected by caffeine, and then other people become very anxious and they don't have a good response to caffeine. That, in part, comes from this first phase of the liver enzymes. Many times we have changes or deficiencies in levels of the enzymes that detoxify caffeine. And if we have a deficiency of that enzyme, it's going to hang around longer, and then our body can excrete it, so then it causes all kinds of issues. For other people, it's no issue. They can excrete it perfectly, and it doesn't create a lot of that kind of that nervousness or that anxiety that you typically see with caffeine. So now look at this. This first phase is a very nutrient-requiring process. You need lots of B vitamins, things like vitamin B12, B6, B3, B2. Those B vitamins work like a team. You also need protein, and also a lot of plant compounds to give you a lot of the different actives in the plants to convert and to help the liver convert these toxins into water-soluble metabolites. Okay, so after the liver does that, it now moves into this state where it's got all of these different compounds that it just made, and it needs to get rid of them. And if the liver can't do this, these actually become free radicals in the body, and they start to do a lot of damage. So we need, again, lots of different vitamins and minerals and even vegetables here. So I'm going to tell you about the different vegetables, the cruciferous vegetables, which can help to negate a lot of these side effects of having all of these metabolites. The third phase is where now we take the garbage outside of the home, so to speak, and we couple a lot of those water-soluble metabolites with protein, and then we take them out of the body into the stool or into the urine. So as you can see here, cleansing is a very nutrient-requiring process. We need the proper nutrients to take us through this. And that's why when I see things like fasting, I get a little bit nervous because we don't always have those nutrients we need then to help the liver to detoxify like it needs to. So it's really important to get adequate nutrients, the right type of nutrients to keep the liver clean. Protein, good quality protein is going to be key for that. And there are some key foods that are going to help in that cleansing process. I'm going to take you through those foods a little bit and focus on them. The emotion that's associated with the liver is anger. So anger is not necessarily a bad emotion, right? All emotions have their purpose. But as we are starting to detoxify and really working on the liver, letting that anger really come forth into journal writing or creative action in some way, because really the anger is speaking to that we need to act. The liver needs to have some activity. All right, so one of the things that might be fun is to make your own what I would call the spa water, right? Because a lot of the citrus compounds, the bioflavonoids that you find in citrus are really important for detoxification processes. So you can take some distilled, some clean, pure water and slice up some slices of orange, of lemon, even kiwi, cucumber, strawberry, and then just let those sit in the water itself. So that's one way to be not just getting the water, but also getting some of those compounds that can be really helpful. Green tea is also wonderful. Green tea contains a lot of different bitter compounds. And I'm just noticing something happening here with the webinar. Let me just be sure everybody's still online. Not sure why. We just had a little technical glitch here. Okay, let's get back to the green tea. Okay, and I just want to be sure that everybody is still online. Okay. We're having a little bit of some technical difficulties here. All right, so let me just be sure. I'm not sure what just happened there. And Vic, if you're on, if you wouldn't mind kind of jumping in if you can. For some reason, I'm not able to share my desktop. Okay. Looks like it's more on the part of the
Honey, will you pause that? Honey, will you pause it?
It's already paused. The recording has paused, and it's telling me that I have to be a presenter. Here we go. I am now the host. Okay. Hopefully you can still hear me. We're back to recording. Okay, let's jump right back in. Can everybody hear me? Vic, maybe if you can just give me a sign.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Okay, so let's proceed. We've got the green tea, which the more bitter we make it, the better it is for the liver. There are lots of cruciferous vegetables that we can extrapolate from. And usually when we think of cruciferous vegetables, we might think of broccoli. But here is an exhaustive list of the many crucifers. There are so many of them. Some of them I haven't even used in my own cooking. Some of them are much more ethnic, or you might find them more in Asian type of grocery stores. But here are some of the basic ones that I think are key. Collard greens are wonderful. In fact, you can use them as wraps. As almost like where you would use a tortilla, you can use a collard green to wrap up different vegetables or rice or other things that you'd like to contain. Kale, so many different types of kale. And kale is just wonderful, very alkalizing. Not sure why we're seeing an issue here with okay, so lots of different forms of kale, very alkalizing. Bok choy is another one. I think this is one of those leafy greens that just really goes unnoticed. Really great for stir fries and other preparation. Here's a Japanese and also Taiwanese form of leafy green, komatsuna, that I thought you just might be interested to see and to hear about. If you do have access to a grocery store with Asian greens, I think a lot of them are very interesting. Many of them are very bitter and also very therapeutic. Arugula. You know, I was talking with a medical doctor the other day, and he was talking about his breakfast being arugula and wild salmon. What a perfect detoxification, cleansing type of meal. And, you know, sometimes we think of breakfast in very traditional ways, thinking about brown, yellow, and white foods, but there's really no reason to omit something like the greens even at breakfast. Watercress, also incredibly very bitter and very healing for the liver. Radishes, you can always tell by the taste of a food. If something is a bit bitter or astringent or pungent, chances are it's probably helping the liver to cleanse. Daikon radishes are also wonderful, all the radishes. Mustard seeds, so they're very small, as you can see here. But roasting these before you include them into a meal, mustard seeds are great for detoxification. Beets are also wonderful. They contain lots of different things, even the beet juice. Without even having the fiber from the beet, Don't forget about the beet greens as well, which are also great to include into a stir fry. Turmeric. Turmeric is a root, and you can either have it fresh, grated into a dish, or you can use the spice, the dried root, which can be used and put into various stir fries or put onto vegetables. You can make coconut curries with turmeric. So hopefully that gives you kind of a sense of what you can do with the liver. The kidney is known as the philosopher. The kidney is there to kind of embodies our heritage, our DNA in Chinese medicine. There's a link there between our lineage, our ancestry, and our kidneys. So the kidneys are responsible for, of course, excreting compounds through the urine, and one of the ways that it does that is by balancing acid and alkaline. And if we're eating lots of acid foods, lots of animal foods like you see here in the picture, the eggs, the fried foods, lots of animal products, what tends to happen is we might see resorption or kind of a reabsorption of a lot of compounds. So instead of them getting excreted into the urine, they go back into our bodies. So really important to keep the kidneys clear. We can do that by drinking enough fluid and also eating a lot of those foods that are alkalizing. So a lot of the foods that I was showing you for the liver can also be really important for the kidneys as well. And the emotion for the kidneys, whereas with the liver it was anger, for the kidneys it's about fear. And just like anger being a motivator, fear can be a motivator as well. So the fight or the flight, right, that's kind of a built-in survival mechanism. So using fear as a motivator rather than attaching to it. The lungs are so wonderful and really do not get a lot of attention. I just happened to be talking with a physician who talked about increased rates of lung cancer in California, especially in runners. And if you think about it, exercising outside next to a highway, next to a road or some area that is more urban where we might be taking in a lot of particulates. But it's not just the outside that has pollutants. Indoor air has been also known to be contaminated with pollutants as well. So definitely looking at things like carbon monoxide levels in your home, looking at things like whether or not there's exposure to smoke. So breathing, deep breathing is going to be really important for releasing and removing a lot of those toxins that stay at the lower part of our lungs and don't really get to come out in our breath. There are also things that you can do in terms of the smell and the exposure to products from kind of an inhalant perspective. We can reduce toxic household product use by using chemical-free products, and there are lots of good ones on the market. So looking at brands like 7th Generation, you know, there are so many brands that are out now that are very good, they don't contain a lot of these chemicals. Reducing chlorine exposure by attaching filters to your shower head so that you're not getting a lot of those chlorine vapors. And of course, looking at personal care products, which we will address in subsequent webinars. And a lot of the pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides that are sprayed can also make their way into the air. So avoiding them as much as you can to help your lungs as well. So deep breathing is going to be key. I talk about the 4 square breath where you inhale for 4 counts, you hold it for 4 counts, you exhale for 4 counts, and you hold for 4 counts. Just imagine drawing a square with your breath. Watching for fumes of products, we spoke about that. Exercising in good quality air. And the emotion that's associated with the lungs is grief. And there's a lot to be said for tears as a conduit of getting rid of toxins. In fact, in tears itself, you can find the release of inflammatory cytokines. So it's a way that the body kind of quote-unquote cools itself off and also helps to reduce inflammation. All right, so we're going to end with the skin, and once we end with the skin, we'll definitely open this up for all kinds of questions. The skin, we're exposed to so much through the skin, through all the different personal care products that we're exposed to. In fact, if you read this book called Slow Death by Rubber Duck, The Secret Danger of Everyday Things, what they say here, and they did lots of calculating and assessing of what we get in our environment. And what they said is that by the time the average woman grabs her morning coffee, she has applied 126 different chemicals in 12 different products to her face, body, and hair. Wow, that's a lot. We've started to eat before we've even started to eat breakfast through our skin. So look at the heavy metals that you find in makeup, and especially the dark red lipsticks tend to be a little bit more high in things like lead. So metals are found in cosmetics, so it's worthwhile checking in with the company that you buy products from to ask them these questions about assessment of heavy metals and other contaminants. Even things like antimicrobial soaps that contain triclosan and other compounds that make them antimicrobial can get into our environment and convert to different metabolites that aren't healthy. And eventually these things make their way into our groundwater. And also there's a lot of debate around using antimicrobial soaps for other reasons. So do they add to the resistance of microbes and change our immune function? You know, that's something that has been talked about. Saunas might be one way to get rid of a lot of those toxins through the skin. I'm a big fan of saunas for certain people. Especially infrared saunas, which are a bit more tolerable and manageable than things like the dry heat sauna, which I just find to be very uncomfortable, quite honestly. So the infrared saunas tend to penetrate the muscle better. You can stay in them longer. They tend to be a little bit more safe. You can adjust the temperature. But if you have conditions that don't warrant you being in heat, such as being pregnant or having cardiovascular issues, having high blood pressure, you definitely want to check with your physician or healthcare practitioner before you do something like a sauna. But you can release a lot within the skin. So keeping the skin clear involves reading labels, reading them just like you would your food products, avoiding aluminum-containing deodorants, sweating. And that doesn't have to mean being in a sauna, but even exercise. So sweating, if that means using a sauna, if that's appropriate, using a skin brush. And a skin brush looks like a vegetable brush where you basically can lightly move this brush along the skin, stimulating and moving the lymphatics, which is really important for getting a lot of those immune factors through. And the skin represents embracing the self. This is self-esteem. Right, so accepting, I like this quote that I heard some time ago about how do we accept the seeming imperfection as perfection. And sometimes perfectionism is our own worst enemy. So how do we let go of some of that attachment to perfection? All right, so in summary, toxins are definitely prevalent in the environment, perhaps now even more than ever if we look at kind of the history and look at just even how our foods are processed, water and the different factories and manufacturing plants that we have worldwide. And it's not something that we have to fear, but something that we can work towards in terms of optimizing the function of the 5 major organs that we spoke about to assist in the proper clearance of those toxins. So I would encourage you at this point to think about what are your top 3 takeaways. I'm actually going to open up the phone lines, and I'd like for you to tell me, even if you don't have a question, I'd like to know what are some of the things that you really feel like are important for you. So I am going to, I'm noticing that my screen has changed again. There is a question from Judith, and Judith, I'm going to unmute you. Let's see if you can come through. Hi, Judith? Judith? Okay, we're not getting Judith, so let me go to Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Deanna.
Hi.
I guess I actually have two questions. One is you're talking about the sweating and sauna and so forth. I don't know that I have access to a sauna, and I think I've heard like Epsom salt baths can help. Is that something that one can do, or is that?
Yeah, I like that idea a lot, Epsom salt baths. And actually I've heard of, there are different recipes. So Epsom salts, which is just basically magnesium sulfate, in combination with baking soda can be a great combination. So yes, you are releasing some of those toxins within a hot bath like that. Just don't forget to rinse off after the bath, because obviously you might still have some of those things remaining on the skin. The thing with a bath versus the sauna is that typically people can stay in a sauna a bit longer, and you might get more sweating in that way. You might not always notice or, have the sweat in a bathtub, but it definitely opens the pores and allows for the excretion of toxins. So, yeah, that's another great strategy if you don't have access to a sauna. So I like that a lot. And it can also help a lot with muscle soreness and pain in the body, just being exposed to that magnesium that you find in Epsom salts. So, yeah, that's a good one.
And the only quick question was, I didn't have a pencil and paper ready when you showed the website, the NLB. What is the rest of that?
Yeah, that is www.ndb.nal.usda.gov, G-O-V.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your questions. So let's see if Judith can come back on the line. Judith, are you there?
Hello?
Hello, Judith?
Yeah, this is Judy.
Okay, hi, Judy. This is Deanna. Did you have a question or takeaway?
Yeah, yes, I did. The other lady was talking about the magnesium bath with Epsom salt. I have been going to a naturopath, where they do a magnesium bath. I put my feet in a top filled with magnesium.
Excellent.
Does that really help the body to detoxify all the toxins?
I don't believe it would help somebody to detoxify all the different toxins, but it surely could be a good conduit to getting some things out. The only thing to note is that sometimes when we're sweating or we do hydrotherapy, like being in a bath, not only are we excreting a lot of those toxins, but we're also excreting a lot of minerals. So even things like our own magnesium or calcium or, all the different minerals that we are really essential to our function. So just keep that in mind, too. That's why I do like using the magnesium, because then we don't necessarily, we can get some absorption of that magnesium as well. But if you're doing extended sweating through exercise, through sauna, or through bathing like that, it might be a good idea to replete with some standard minerals that might get lost through the sweat.
How about
to answer your question.
Yeah, so with chlorophyll, will that be considered a form of magnesium?
Chlorophyll as a form of magnesium. Some types of chlorophyll, yes, use magnesium or have magnesium in the middle of that chlorophyll compound. But magnesium is quite ubiquitous in the food supply. So getting things like nuts and whole grains, certain whole grains can be good. Even some fruits and vegetables have good levels of magnesium. If you go to that website that I mentioned, whfoods.com, you will actually find, just do a search on magnesium. They have a whole nice list of different magnesium-containing foods there that you could reference.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. Any last questions or comments? Anything that you'd like to share that you've learned, or any comments in general? Karen, I'm going to go to you. I think that you're raising your hand again. All right.
Yes.
Okay, good. Karen?
Hi, Deanna.
Hi.
You talked about eating sweet potato skins. I thought there are two things you talked about that I thought that I wasn't supposed to do. One is eating sweet potato or yam skins. And, oh, I just got your picture back on my computer.
Some computer issues tonight, it looks like, so yes. So you're saying that, okay, about the skin.
Okay to eat sweet potato skins?
You know, if you wash the sweet potato or the yam very well, right, with a scrub brush in soapy water, there's no reason not to eat the skin. And if you're buying organic, and again, because a lot of the potato-type products are sitting in the soil, they might have more exposure to the things like the pesticides or insecticides or herbicides and such. So you just want to wash it really well, but that is a good way to get some fiber. And so as long as you wash it really well, I think that it is a good way to get some additional fiber with your sweet potato. In fact, if I can just share with you a quick morning breakfast dish, I may have mentioned this before, Karen, in one of our group sessions at Harmony Hill, but it's one of my favorites. So you take quinoa. Quinoa is Q-U-I-N-O-A, right? It's a grain, but it's a grain that's high in protein. And I put that in a rice cooker, so I don't even, it's a very no-nonsense grain, just like rice. I put about a cup of that into the rice cooker with some water. And then I take either a yam or a sweet potato, I wash it really well, and I cube it. So this is just an uncooked sweet potato or yam, and I toss that into the quinoa with the water, and I put all of those things, and I just start to cook that to the rice cooker. And then when it's done, about 15 to 20 minutes later, I take that with some coconut milk. I take it with also adding some chopped nuts to that for some additional protein, and I make it like a warm cereal. Sometimes you can even make that like a dessert. You can add cinnamon to it, a little bit of stevia if you want it more as a dessert. But definitely, I think that sweet potato and yam skins together with the meat of the sweet potato is more balancing for the glycemic impact. And what you might be thinking of is that sweet potatoes and yams tend to be moderate in glycemic impact, but when you have the skin with it, it's more helpful for reducing that.
Great. Okay.
Sure.
And you also had on the list of low mercury fish. Excuse me, I'm fighting whatever this is I've got. That farmed salmon was lower in mercury, and I thought farmed salmon was a definite no-no. Only fresh.
Now that was, well, farmed salmon is a tricky one. Let me go back to that slide so we can all be looking at that. So with, let's just go there. Now the thing with farmed is that, yes, I'm not a big fan, and the reason why I'm not a big fan of that is because you tend to get, typically the fish can be grain-fed or corn-fed, and the actual composition of the fish can have less omega-3s, and it can have more of other compounds that you don't necessarily want. But yeah, in this case, the Environmental Working Group put farmed trout on this list because, again, under farmed type of conditions, you can control what is going into the fish's body a bit more because it's basically, you know, they have the fish within a container and they're feeding them certain things. So it doesn't mean that you should have this per se because, you know, farmed has other issues. But when we're looking just at low mercury containing fish, this is the list that's provided by the Environmental Working Group. I'm glad that you do mention the whole idea of farmed versus wild, however, because even in farmed fish, you can get added levels of different pigments or dyes to help the fish look, you know, more orange or more red in color. And so, you know, all kinds of issues with farmed fish. So again, the preference here would be definitely to have wild. So I hope that answers your question, Karen.
Yes.
But this is a comprehensive list from the EWG.
Yeah, and you had mentioned during as you were talking, that when you wash it, it's okay to take a good scrubber and wash it in soap and water, but then rinse it well. But using soap.
You got it, and dry it well. Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Karen. Good questions always from you.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to go to Mary Ellen and see if Mary Ellen has a question or a comment.
Yes, Deanna.
Hi.
Really, hi. Lots of comments, really, but I won't go into them except to say that this is a very helpful webinar. Thank you so much. I just want to ask you, I imagine that, well, perhaps you're not using labeled products just to be on the safe side, but I do want to know if what your feeling is about fruit and vegetable wash by Environe.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of the health food stores sell that, and I'm just wondering how effective you think that is. I suppose it might be as effective as using what you said, which was a Castile soap, I think. And
yes.
It depends on the friction that is applied as well, correct?
Yes. Yes, it does. And I'm kind of laughing here because that's the brand I happen to have in my own kitchen.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, two things here. If you fill up the sink with soapy water, you already have that as a soap. And if you're using a more environmentally conscious soap, a dishwashing soap, then, there are different brands that are really good for that purpose. So you're using that as an emulsifier to take off a lot of the fatty, waxy layers. And I do like a lot of those. I think BioClean is also another good one. And so I think if you're using the soapy water and then using even the citrus extract products like Environe and also like BioClean and others, then I think that's really a 1-2 punch. Does it get everything off? Well, it's the best that we can do, right? Because we've got the mechanical motion of scrub brush, we've got the citrus cleaner, and we also have the soapy water. So we've got a number of different things there to help mitigate our risk as much as possible. And if the food is organic, you are also having that added layer. And if you tend to take off a couple of layers of the skin, let's just imagine it's cabbage or something where you can easily do that, then really I think that you are taking a lot of good precautions.
Right. Just one more question connected with that. Do you wear gloves when you use this stuff? So because I'm thinking about the skin, the palms of the hand, how.
Well, and I think that's really a good point, Mary Ellen. You can wear gloves. I don't personally because I'm washing my hands before and after I'm working with the fruits and vegetables, washing them off. The only thing I'll mention about
but
gloves,
excuse me, but when you're putting this on, for instance, an apple or an orange, you're actually massaging it with your hands.
Yes.
Or you can brush it as well, and that would keep your hands a bit further away.
Right, but your point is well taken. And in fact, things like berries where you're not going to be using a scrub brush, you might want to use gloves. And in fact, just note with the different types of kitchen gloves that are out there, many people are developing more and more latex allergy. So if you get gloves, what I might recommend there is the vinyl kind, which is not as irritating as the latex. I'm just bringing up now a different issue, but, do you want a lot of, that exposure? So, I think it's just basically you can call it as you need it based on the food. And if it's a food that you need to use your hands with, then, using gloves would be a very good option. That's a good idea.
Okie dokie. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Okay, one last question from Sheila.
Hi.
Hi, Sheila.
Great. I'm glad that I can hear you and you can hear me. My question has to do with when you were talking about the cookware, the stainless steel, the cast iron, the glass, and the porcelain. And I would like to know, if you know this, what is the benefit of using the cast iron over anything else?
Well, you can imagine that since it's iron containing, you may tend to get a little bit of iron in your cooking. So for people, it's often recommended for people that are anemic that have low amounts of iron to cook in cast ironware because they could get a little bit more iron in that way. The downside of iron is for people that don't need more iron, they're going to be getting some iron. So for people that have iron storage diseases like hemochromatosis, people that are more concerned about heart disease and high levels of iron, women that are no longer menstruating and storing more of their iron, and also men. It's kind of a mix. It kind of depends on the person and whether or not you need iron, but it can be a good thing for some, and it can be not such a great thing for others. And my rule of thumb on this is just like I apply this with food. Variety, variety, variety. You know, many times we hear about something and then we change to that completely, and it becomes that's the only thing we use, just like oils. We hear something good about coconut oil, and then we start using only coconut oil, and we lose the variety of olive oil, walnut oil, all types of different oils. And I would say the same things about pots and pans. Mix it up so that you are getting some variety in the cookware. I think that is a very good idea, just so that, you know, again, if you don't need the iron and you happen to have some cast ironware, that you can trade off. And note that a lot of the coatings, in fact, I just had a conversation yesterday about this, a lot of the coatings that are on pans to cook without oil can be very toxic and liberated into the food upon cooking. And it's not that you have that right away, but many times with age, and you can see that there are scrape marks on the pan, or, you know, other types of damage that can liberate small amounts of those toxins into the food that you're cooking. So if you start to see that your pans and pots are becoming damaged, and they do have some kind of coating, definitely want to start using different types of cookware, newer.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, fabulous. So again, thank you everybody for being on tonight. What I'm going to do is send out a newsletter to everybody through Food and Spirit, just summarizing some of the points that we talked about. I will summarize the websites as well. And hopefully we'll see you back next week to talk about the top 10 foods to eat and the top 10 foods to avoid. So thank you very much for spending some time with us tonight.